So you mean to
And
tell me it takes 17 licks to get to the gooey center?
I can't confirm or deny that because by doing so, I would have to end your life because that's not information you are allowed to know.
Oh
That's
no.
oh
Oh
shoot.
no.
I feel like I'm missing something.
Yeah, the dangers of trying to figure out how to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop.
Hasn't that been tested already?
I know that MatPat has done some stuff. Let's make that nice and big. That
Yes.
Stardew Valley. Oh, that's
How's it looking?
lovely. It's looking good. Let's see here. Just make sure our audio's coming through all nice and good.
It is on my end, but my end is
It's
not
it
the user end.
it's coming across really nice on my end. So
Real nice
Nice
and
and
crispy.
crispy.
nice and
Crispy.
crisp.
Alright.
Mmm. Crispy treats, Krispy Kremes. Hey, Tevin Daniels, always there to greet us right there at the beginning. Welcome, Tevin.
A real champ.
Oh shoot,
Oh
I
yeah.
meant to oh, bother.
I'm glad the notifications are going through because it gets really strange. I want to make sure that I get notifications even though I'm the one who's uploading a lot of the videos, and sometimes I don't get them and I'm like, "What?"
Just YouTube being YouTube, am I right?
YouTube being YouTube. Oh
YouTube's
boy.
a real poopy pants.
The joy of YouTube. You know, what's strange? Like
Oh
I know this
boy.
is kind of like peeling back the curtain and revealing the wizard. Uh, but like when it comes to like monetization of the channel, so we're fine. So we're accruing money, for the videos that we do, but we're not done yet. I just got mailed the special pin that we now have to use in order to then fulfill like the next three steps in potentially
Oh,
getting paid in the
what?
future.
Oof.
So they were
That's a
Yeah,
like,
lot of
yes,
work.
you'll get paid, but
I still get paid, but only when we want.
yeah.
All right,
We're
so Tevin, another random topic tonight? No, tonight we are talking dialogue. I say we actually have a plan.
Believe it or not. Before we start that, give me 1 second. I gotta go grab something.
All right,
I
go
mean,
ahead,
okay,
you can
grab
bye.
start.
something.
You can start, but I will be AFK for a moment.
Okay,
Kill the
I'll then
app.
take it. I'll then just take a moment to kind of introduce like why this is going on. So a little while back, I did a video on my tips, some of my tips for writing dialogue, and I put it in the video that's like let us know if you want us to talk about this. And I mean, without much prompting, we ourselves are like, yeah, let's talk about it because it's something that is very, very important to do within a story. Figuring out how your characters speak to each other, how you're going to write that out, uh, all the various ways in which to do that, and each one of us does it differently. And so, having the chance for all of us to kind of share some of our insights and everything, I think that will be very helpful to all of you and as well to ourselves. We learn from sharing.
Because sharing is caring.
And so, like for instance, right here, um, so already a couple things right here. So we got Tevin saying I use said a lot in my writing. Uh, and here's the thing is that that's actually not a bad thing to do. I was convinced for a while that using said was bad, and then I was reading Mistborn, and then later on the Stormlight Archive, and Brandon Sanderson, who is very creative with his words, was like, she said, he said, they said, he said. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, like it's totally
Sometimes,
fine to say said.
yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like said for a while got really villainized when most of the time it's probably the best word to use. So it
Yeah.
doesn't
Mm,
look like you're trying too hard.
Well, and I
yeah.
think that the only time that like using the word said a lot is a drawback is if you're doing audiobooks. Because then in audiobooks you hear he said, she said, he said, she said, which can get a little bit obnoxious, especially if they're going to be short little sentences. You know, like
Hmm.
if they're like riffing off of each other, the characters. But when you're actually reading the book, which is what
Ooh.
most people do,
Do
you
do.
read right past you read right past the he said she said stuff. You know what I mean? Like it's
Hmm.
almost
Right.
like your brain doesn't really register it because it doesn't really need to. It just helps kind of mark who is talking, which is the most important part of dialogue, is knowing who is
Hmm.
saying what.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just having this conversation with my sister last night about like the works of Ernest Hemingway. I enjoy reading Hemingway's books, but and I actually like his chaotic dialogue, but there are moments where you're like, who's even talking? Because he doesn't ever say.
Yeah. Ugh,
It's
Yeah,
so
that really
aggravating.
bothers me.
yeah.
That's one of my biggest reading pet peeves. Ooh.
A
And
Yeah,
I
that
feel,
get pretty bad. And
yeah.
then we have right here. I think this is an interesting little point. So this is from title. Half the dialogue in my book is me talking to myself in the voices of the characters. There is something interesting to be said about that right there. Um, Brandon Mole once said at a convention that if anyone were to drop by his house while he's writing, they would most likely hear him carrying on really weird conversations with himself in his basement. And he said that he does that to help himself discover the voice and feel of his characters
Ah.
before he starts writing them out. So, like, I think it's definitely okay to like try that out, to like write that out, speak that out. Want to do it in your basement, closet, a room away from someone else, or in front of other people if you're totally okay with that.
In a creepy
Do
whisper.
creepy whispers, yeah. Carry on creepy conversations with your characters, because it helps you to get to know them. Um, but the one of the biggest dangers is this, and this has definitely been told to me by people who've like read some of my earlier stuff, where it's just like it sounds like you're talking to yourself,
Mm.
and that's not good. So you want to make sure that like characters sound unique to themselves, and that it's not just you having a conversation with yourself through different personalities.
Right.
So uh so I'd say at that on that note, Nathan, Camille, what are some things that maybe you try to do to make your character sound unique?
Well, I think an important aspect of dialogue and making characters sound unique would be how, like, thinking about how your characters relate to each other. Because you talk very differently to somebody you have just met on the street
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes ago, but you talk totally differently to somebody who is, like
Ow.
your best friend who you've known for 10, 15, 20 plus years. Like the way you
Right.
interact with those people is astronomically different than the way you interact with somebody you've just met. And the way you interact with somebody you have just met and how you interact with people you are very familiar with can say a lot about your character. It's like if you're super snarky to somebody who you just met on the street 5 minutes ago and you're kind of being an ass to them, then your character's probably a jerk. Did I just describe half of the young adult protagonists? I sure did. But, if they're if they're really snarky and that way to somebody who they're really close friends with who's snarky back, that's a different story, because then it's like, oh, they're best friends. They can riff off of each other like that. But
Right.
if the character is like being an asshole to somebody they just met, who they
That doesn't
haven't
make
really
them
established.
likable.
Exactly.
Wow. A flounder.
And so it's like, it's like, yeah, it makes them very unlikable because it's like, yo, you don't know this person. You haven't built chemistry yet. Therefore, why are you being an ass to them?
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a big one.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if it can, sorry if I cut you off, Camille.
No, I was just gonna say, I feel like that kind of falls under the umbrella. If there was a Venn diagram of dialogue and just characterization, that would be in the middle of the two.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, that's all. I'm gonna fish again. What were you saying, Liz?
Fish for that flounder. I was just going to say, yeah, if you write a character who acts as a total jerk, like if that's that character, that's absolutely fine. But like when it
Right.
comes to conversations, if if characters on the receiving end of the conversation aren't feeling all defensive and offended by a character being an absolute jerk, it better be because like they have like some understanding that you then have to like show and develop within the story. Otherwise the characters should respond kind of like abrasively to the jerk, because then otherwise it just does not feel realistic at all. And I actually am going to now take Brandon Mull, who I just propped up, and I'm going to now throw him under the bus because he screwed up royally with that in his Five Kingdoms series. He writes a total jerk character, like everyone just like accepts it. And it's just all like do being all friendly with him, and there's no reason for them to be friends with him because this guy is an absolute just awful individual. And like you really dropped the ball on that one. The dialogue does not read well at all. Forget realistic; it doesn't read well.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Because I feel like all too often, this is a tangent, but I feel like all too often we really want to have a snarky, sarcastic character who always has the best comebacks and is always so witty, and they almost become like a caricature
Uh-huh.
of a person because realistically, if someone was constantly doing that, people around them would be like, wow, this guy is an asshole. I don't want to be around them. They're not very likable. But they can be written in a way to where it's like the story is written around them so that they can be the main character. And I say
Yeah.
that in a bad way. That you
Uh-huh.
don't want to do that.
No.
So,
Mm-hmm.
no, that's a really good point when it comes to dialogue because there are so many layers. It's like you want your dialogue to be unique for every character. You also want it to be realistic
Yeah.
and you want it to read well. Like those are like the top 3 things I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheese.
And I
And
think sorry, go ahead, Lars.
oh no, Nathan, you go on ahead because what I was just going to say was something. I was just reiterating something I said in the previous video. So take it
Oh,
away.
okay. Well, I was just gonna say that like when you're writing like characters that are familiar with each other, like one thing, or even just like I feel like a lot of the time in books. Sorry, let me gather my thoughts. A lot of oh, I am typing Z into the comments. We don't want that. Just like 100 Z's. That's not what we want. Um, the I lost my train of thought. Oh my goodness! Wow,
It's
I'm a
on.
disaster. It was the
Then I'll
Z's. They threw me off the train.
the Z's. Zzz. Well,
Um,
like
you go ahead, Lars. I'll
correct.
think of it in a second.
Now I'm suddenly lost. Well, so what I was going to what one of the things I was going to reiterate in this uh and this actually comes down to what Dragon Uprising just shared with us. They're snarky, and then there's just too much.
Yeah,
Getting to like know like a character's personality, uh, like you can really show that in like the words that you use. And you want to be able to use to use stuff that like that's going to sound good to your audience, like what you were saying earlier, Nathan, with like the whole he said she said, like what, like to us it's just that stuff just kind of gets filtered on out as we're reading, but there are other words that like stick on out to us.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
And so like you want to find ways of like communicating like those words that get across that character's personality
Yeah.
in like the words that they speak, in the body language that they have. But yeah, it's so easy to turn someone into a caricature. And sometimes we like to say, "Oh, I did that on purpose," because that's basically what they are. But the problem is that if you do that too much, then the character just becomes too much, and too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing. It makes you sick of
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think kind of going off of like using the right words to really accentuate the personality. Um, a lot of the times you can like explicitly say who's talking without explicitly saying who's talking. You know what I mean? Like there's
Right.
definitely ways to go about it, like, you know, so and so turned to face him and then and then I really think that's a great idea. You know what I mean? Like, so you don't have to be like, turns to face him, and they said blank. You can
Yeah.
just say, they turned to face him, speaking line. Because it's like, we are obviously talking about this person who has just turned to face the other individual. Therefore, like, it must be them who's talking. Now, if somebody else says something, then you do want to say who is doing the talking. So, you know, it goes back to typography. You know, how do you construct your paragraphs to make sure that each paragraph has a coherent thought to it? You know, if a
Right.
character is doing all of the actions and then all of a sudden somebody else is talking, then that needs to be in a different paragraph because this paragraph has been about this specific character. But if this specific character says something, then you can leave it in that paragraph. You know? And
That
so
made my
it's like,
brain hurt.
yes. But I did finally remember what I was going to say earlier.
Oh, which
Um,
is?
so what I was going to say earlier is that a lot of the times in books we see, you know, dialogue as these like big monologue or like huge chunks of text, like basically characters not so much dialoguing with each other, but monologuing back and forth. You know what I mean? Like, where
Right.
it's
Mm-hmm.
like you have like a paragraph or two of just somebody spouting out word vomit, and then the other character spouting out word vomit, and
Yeah,
it's
at
like,
the most convenient spot.
yeah, and so it's like that's not how dialogue works in real life. Is a lot of it is like short clipped, just, you know, short little things bouncing back and forth and back and forth. And so don't be afraid to do that. And unless like, you know, maybe you're telling a story or your character is telling a story to another character or they're explaining something or something to that matter, like then sure, have long drawn out
Right.
uh dialogue. But for the most part, most dialogue is like in real life, if you notice, it's pretty short.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
will say on the flip side of that, I should pause so I don't pass time. To be the devil's advocate, there's also a to an extent like a suspension of belief when it comes to dialogue when it with
Uh-huh.
like movies and books because you don't want it so similar to real life because that no dialogue in anything is going to be 100% like real life is because talking in real life is really messy and it can be really boring and
Yes.
etc etc. And I feel like with movies like writing a script is a great example of this is like there's definitely a balance between the two
Yeah.
where you don't want it so like theatrical but you do want that realism behind it,
Oh
but
yeah.
at the same time, and this goes with writing a book, like at the same time you'll never have it's so realistic that it feels like two people talking, and that can be a really hard thing for people to pin
Yeah.
down is the
Mm-hmm.
balance between the two. So it's
Uh-huh.
easy to be like we got to make it realistic, but you actually can't make it so realistic that then it's like whoa, this
And
I
then
don't
it
like
knocks
reading
them out
this.
of, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
fun example along that line. Because I had this conversation with a really good friend of mine a while back, but like you bringing this up now totally calls it back to memory. where he's talked about how Quentin Tarantino films, people either love them or hate them. And one of the big things is like the dialogue. Quentin Tarantino tries to write, as people like his fans say, he writes very realistic dialogue. And
Mm-hmm.
like there are time and he loves to just write out conversations, random conversations,
Uh-huh.
which can be really fun to read and to listen to sometimes, but other times it's just like what's the point of this? Like, okay, I'm
Yeah,
getting
like
a little bit
this.
of the characters, but how does this contribute to like the chapter moving forward or
Mm-hmm.
to the plot moving forward? And when Quentin Tarantino is on point is when he writes conversations that are applicable to the plot. Because then it's like,
Yes.
oh, I'm getting the characters, I'm getting their personalities, and the plot's moving along. Excellent.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, that's an
And
No,
excellent point.
that's a good example.
John Wells also shared, I think, a really good example here in the chat about the Zodiac film. It's a film
Oh, I've seen
that's
that.
very dialogue heavy, but it's because there's a
Very.
whole lot of discussions and planning. That's absolutely the case. The setting of your story will absolutely determine if you're going to have like long conversations and
Yeah,
Yeah.
stuff like that, or
exactly.
monologues.
Yeah. Yeah, I should definitely put an asterisk that like the short conversations is for like familiarizing yourself with the characters, not necessarily for pushing the plot forward. Like so
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
and for me it's like I love writing dialogue because I have so much fun with exploring the characters as characters, if that makes sense. Like I love just letting the characters have fun being themselves, being their characters. And so a lot of the times I'll just put two of my characters in the situation and then just let them have at it and see what dialogues, see what conversation they end up having. And it's a very garden style approach to writing. Um, but for me, I feel like it really makes it so that like it's really fun for me to write, and in turn oftentimes that means that it's going to be fun to read, because if you're not having fun writing this story, then your readers aren't going to have fun, most likely. Like, because you
Right.
can tell, you can definitely
Whoops.
tell when somebody's like,
I'm just
you
trying
know
to get through this chapter.
yeah, they're not,
Mm-hmm.
when your heart's not in it. And there's been a few chapters that I'm like, well, this is a really important part of my book, but I'm not feeling it. So I've just axed the whole chapter because you can feel that my heart's not in it. And I'm like, this
Yeah.
just brings down the quality of my book. Even though, yes, it makes more sense in the long run, it's not quality. It's not the quality that I want it to be. So why would I have it in my book? You know what I mean?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. That
Um,
so many things.
there's so many things, and this is like, and I love what I'm seeing here in the chat from everyone right here, because this once again just goes to show how varied dialogue is. And
Mm-hmm.
title does bring up a good point. Like, there's just sometimes where there's no way around it. You have to have a character sit down and explain what the heck is going on.
For
Uh,
sure.
you can't just simply show it. Like, you definitely want to show, but sometimes showing is not good enough, especially like if you're writing a fantasy story and you have a hard magic system. You have to explain how it works.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing a sci-fi story with what that gets very technical, you have to explain that.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing a mystery story, at some point someone has to divulge what's going on, and that's
Yeah.
very monologue or dialogue heavy.
Yeah.
So
And
there's some point you just can't escape it.
there's
Yeah,
nothing
like
wrong
the
with having long monologues or dialogues. It's just to figure out when the balance is, like where to use it and how to
whoopsies.
talk, how characters talk to each other. Like I said,
Hmm.
Mhm.
two people who have known each other for a very, very long time will probably have quicker quips back and forth rather than
Yeah.
longer dialogues. If you've only met the villain just this chapter, he's not going to sit there and, uh, they're not gonna, what's the word? Wow, my brain's
You can do it.
Oh, geez, what's the word?
Trying to read your brain from across the state.
When two characters are just like riffing with each other, what is that called?
Banter?
Banter.
They're
Thank you.
banter.
Yeah,
You're
when they're
welcome.
just like, I mean, sure, you might have a little bit of banter, but it's like it's gonna be a very different kind of banter that two best friends would have.
Oh,
Yeah.
excellent point. To that. Jed, who maybe he's here with us in spirit. I know his limbs are.
Hello, Jed. I can feel
uh,
him embracing me right now.
Yep. I am very thankful to Jed for calling out my epilogue for Knights of Halley Cruise, where I wanted two of my characters to have like a certain kind of banter. And like to me it made sense, like the names they were tossing back and forth and the insults. Jed said, I don't get it.
Mm,
He's like, I don't follow. He's like, okay, so a guy's really tall. Why is that a joke? and and he's like, you're not getting the personality across enough in just this epilogue.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like to me it reads well, but if it doesn't read well to someone else,
yeah,
then
like you as the writer, it makes sense.
yeah. And so I had to go back and I had to make it way more straightforward. Those characters' personalities will be revealed in time when they take a much larger role in the story. But for that final chapter, it had to be more straightforward.
Right.
So it's just like, um, I think, I mean, from that I learned two things. Number one, get other people's input into how your dialogue reads. And then another thing is that sometimes you can't rely on quips or catchphrases or favorite words from the characters
Yeah.
to pull the conversation through.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whoops.
And have fun with it.
Come here.
That's really my biggest suggestion. If you're struggling with dialogue, figure out a way to have fun with it. I think one of the best things that I ever did for my dialogue writing was I literally sat down and wrote an entire scene between two of my characters talking on the phone. And these two characters, phones didn't exist in this world, and so this was just a side story, just like a little side scene, just to kind of feel like what it would feel like if these two people talked without any body language, without any like visual cues. What would the conversation sound like? And I think that helped me so much build out these two characters and like how they communicate with each other, because I wasn't relying on like all of these other things to tell me about their personalities. Instead, it was just, the tone of their voice and the words they were saying. That's all I could go off of. And it helped me a lot kind of figure it out. And then also, how both of them bounced off of each other made for a really fun scene to write.
What characters?
Lily and Paven.
Oh, okay.
Ooh.
Oh, is this? Are we talking about our slice of life?
Yes.
Now that slice of life that we say we're always going to come back to.
Yeah.
Maybe
Okay,
someday.
say the word. Say the word, and I'm on it. I need external motivation these days.
I know. I have written like a handful of chapters in the last 8 months, and it's sad.
Yeah. Mood. This is not a writing year for me. It's a reading year, evidently.
Hey, sometimes
At
that
least
just
it's
happens.
something. It's not a writing
mean,
or reading year for me. It's more of a personal.
It just existing.
Yeah.
You're really getting though your sea legs with this new job.
I am.
So like
I
feel like you shouldn't judge yourself too harshly on it at all.
No. Well,
I'll tell you what, there's a whole lot of sea ahead of me, so I better get used to it.
Oh.
Whoops. No, I did want to do that. No, and I will say with reading a lot this year has actually been very helpful. Like, damn, when people are like, "Oh, you want to know how to write better? Read more." They mean it.
Yes. Yeah, they do.
Mm-hmm.
That that actually is another thing that has single-handedly helped uh my writing as well.
Yeah,
Especially my dialogue too, since that's
yeah, to come full circle. No, I
to come full
agree.
circle. Yeah.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, like I feel like um I feel like maybe best case scenario is try to read things if you want to get a better idea of like how to go about dialogue based on the genre you're reading. I still feel like it's beneficial to read things that are outside of that genre that you want to write in.
Outside of the
Um,
Yes.
genre comfort level, yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely.
And
So because right now it's like I really am into like horror thrillers, so I've been reading that. But at the same time, I'm making sure to read other things beyond that because I don't really write horror thriller, but I do want to go into that. I want to dip my toe into that a little bit.
Dip your toe in
But
the piggy pond.
yeah, I want to dip my toes in the piggy pond, the horror piggy pond. But there's so much that can be said of exploring outside of the genre you want to really get a feel for how characters interact with each other and what they're saying to each other.
Yeah.
hmm Yeah, and sometimes like seeing how other people write dialogue outside of the genre that you're writing for can actually be like really beneficial sometimes to realize that all those other stories within that genre that you've been reading and really enjoying, that dialogue works only for that book.
Absolutely.
Like for instance, Harry Potter. Dialogue in Harry Potter works really well for Harry Potter. Try writing that dialogue in another story and it becomes a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've tried it before and I was like mortified. I'm like, but I enjoy the way that these characters speak in Harry Potter,
But those
but it's
aren't
not
your
working over
characters.
here.
Yeah.
Right.
That's another thing about a lot of people will take conversations from real life and try and transpose them into a book, and very
hmm
rarely does it work well.
Right. Or I feel like another folly is trying too hard to make your dialogue sound like another author's.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like I think Lemony Snicket is a hilarious writer, and that writing worked so well for a series of unfortunate events. Does it work outside of a series of unfortunate events? No, especially if someone else is trying to mimic that.
Yeah.
Boop. Move.
Now, somebody can certainly use that as inspiration to
Yeah,
create
there's a
their
huge,
own. Yeah.
huge difference.
Yeah, there's a huge
hmm
difference between inspiration and copying, or
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
Inspiration and plagiarism are two totally different things.
Oh,
No
absolutely.
matter
That
what
could.
no matter what 6th grade me tries to say.
Yeah. There's an entire rant in there, uh, somewhere.
Go
No
I
on
can
a
already
doubt.
feel,
minute,
already
save it
feel,
for
I feel bubbling up.
Why do my chickens hate me right now?
I thought that one loved you, or was that a duck?
Um, I gotta see. Nope, looks fine. Okay, they're being all passive aggressive. I think only my pig loves me. My pig and my goats love me.
Thank you for loving me.
Thank you.
Um, we got a question right here from Title, and I think that this might be a good way to start wrapping things up
uh huh.
for us right here. Um, I mean, we brought this up earlier, but what did she ask, or they asked, what do you guys think about catchphrases?
It depends. I think it depends on the series. It depends on the situation. It depends on the energy you're looking for in a book. It's very hard
Yeah.
to take a catchphrase particularly seriously. That being said, I mean, you look at like Iron Man, for example. Like, his catchphrase is literally "I am Iron Man," and at first
Right,
it's
but
not
he's not
really,
like saying that super often.
yeah, and it's not like a
Mhm.
"I'm Iron Man," ba-dum-bum, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
Cut to the camera.
yeah, but it's like
Yeah.
when he says it in Endgame, like, it's really impactful, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Especially with like the "I am inevitable" catchphrase.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question because I feel like that's a tough one because if you play it right, I feel like the MCU is a good example of it not being overused, but it's used in really integral parts to where it's super impactful because it is really easy to take a catchphrase and overplay it.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
I
Um,
struggle.
agree. I agree, and
I
that, I
I
think, is my biggest reservation for catchphrases, is that it's very easy to overdo. But
Mm-hmm.
when
yeah.
used appropriately, they can be quite impactful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I feel like there's definitely the impactful catchphrases, and then there's the catchphrases that are played up for laughs. If you're going to do it for laughs, you have to like it's all about the timing.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It's all about the timing. Like for instance, in Pokemon, you've got Meowth who does the meow. That's right, like that's his thing to
yeah,
kind of like underscore whatever ridiculousness Jesse and James have been saying.
yeah,
Um, and and the writers for the show realized when they were overplaying it, and then have like Meowth like say other things from time to time, so that way his catchphrase whenever they introduce themselves is never overdone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean,
yeah,
yeah, and that's a little bit more childish right there, but like definitely goes say like if a catchphrase is meant to be humorous, it needs to be treated like a joke, and it's all about the timing and the land and like the landing.
yeah,
And that was something I had to especially do with Tuffy, Knights of Cruise, because
yeah,
this whole like
Yeah.
guard your Achilles. He says it a lot, and there's definitely places where it is annoying, but there's other
yeah,
places where it's humorous.
yeah.
And there were definitely times where I wrote it way too often, and I
Uh-huh.
had to go back and take it out.
Well, and I think that with, like, your Tuffy situation, you have to be careful to make sure that when he's saying these things, it makes sense for him to say these things in that context. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm. Yes.
most people in real life don't really have catchphrases. And once again, we're going for dramatics, not necessarily realism, but it's a balance, like we talked about earlier. And I think that if you lean too heavily into it, then you run the risk of using these catchphrases when they don't make sense. Like,
Hmm.
me and my girlfriend, we say all the time, like, well, the best part about messes is that you can always clean them up, and so it's like, if I just, like, dropped my phone, just one little item, I'm like, well, the best part about messes is you can clean them up. It's like, that doesn't really make sense. You didn't really make a mess. You just dropped your phone,
Yeah.
and so it's like, but if, like, you spilt milk all over the place, and now there's the kitchen's a disaster, and you're down and in the dumps because you just feel like your life is spiraling out of control. And then they say, the best part about messes is that you can always clean them up. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
and so it's like, it makes a huge difference, the context in which you say these catchphrases.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, context matters.
Yeah.
Um, let's see here. I guess kind of like the last thing to really say on this right here. Uh, right here. So the one catchphrase I ever had in a story. This is from Dragon Uprising. The one catchphrase I ever had in a story is when the main characters of my sci-fi fantasy story say "mask," and their symbiotic partner replies with "copy." Okay. I mean, I'd like to know what I mean. I have read some of
Yeah.
this right here. I'd like to see more of the context, and that's definitely something that comes down to it. context,
Oh.
character really matter for a good catchphrase. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something that, as Nathan said, we don't have that like in real life. Though Title says that "get your game on" is her favorite catchphrase. So go get your game on. Uh, but usually, um, that's not a thing. So you have to build up the character, build up the situation, and then
Yeah.
most definitely you can have the catchphrase come across. Which, coming back to what was brought up with Iron Man, you understand who Iron Man is by the end of the story, by the end of the first movie. So when he says "I am Iron Man," boom, it
Yeah.
hits.
Yeah. And I think that if you really want a good way to make your characters more fleshed out is to maybe not rely on just one catchphrase, but maybe having, and maybe the word catchphrase isn't even the right thing to say, but just word like words that they say often, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Mm-hmm.
like I have a character who loves to come up with like little sayings, and he'll like make up just like the strangest little sayings and like kind of sneak them into conversations cuz he thinks they're fun. Right? And so it's like in that situation it's like he doesn't really have one catchphrase, but he does have a lot of unique things to say. And so
Yeah.
it kind of builds on his character rather than, you know,
Yeah,
making
then
him
that
one
just
dimensional.
becomes like a right. That kind of gives him like a character quirk.
Yeah. And so it's like with catchphrases, you can run the risk of kind of like,
Making a caricature.
yeah, making a character kind of undimensionalizing them. Is that a thing? Is that a word?
It
I'm
is
going to say
now.
yes. It is now.
Flanderizing.
Oh yeah,
Flanderizing.
there you are. That's it.
Yeah, and you run the risk of flanderizing your character, which, you know, because then all of a sudden now you're just relying on this catchphrase, which
Yeah.
your character deserves more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And so do
Absolutely.
your readers.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think Nathan, you said it all really great there. So uh,
Fabulous.
let's
Yes, and
close
I
out.
think let's we got one last chapter in or chapter one last question in here. Um guys, I'd like to know for you, what are the video games that are a great example of storytelling? Well, for me, I absolutely adore the Legend of Zelda series. I think although they're not necessarily story heavy, the way they kind of interact, like the way they have story interact with the rest of the
Right.
game is prime. Uh, so it yes, and I love the lore, the overall narrative of Zelda.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything to add to that?
I have a list.
Yes.
If you want good storytelling in video games,
God of War.
yes, God of War 2018 is fantastic. You don't necessarily need to have played the previous games to feel the impact of the newest game. It definitely helps. I would, you know what, you could just Google that, but that has incredible storytelling in it. The Mass Effect games, those are super impactful as well, especially because they kind of put you in the seat of making decisions, and your decisions have consequences. Red Dead Redemption, I said that really weird. Red Dead Redemption, especially the second one, super, super good, very immersive.
Yeah.
But the story is really good as well.
Yeah.
Like Nate said, Legend of Zelda. I'm trying to think.
I'm sure I have more. Um,
For sure.
Mhm.
I don't play a ton of JRPGs, but one that I thoroughly love the story of was called I Am Setsuna. Real
Oh.
sad. Really got me going. Um,
Boop.
that's a good one.
Hey,
That's a really good example of storytelling.
don't you also like
And
Fire Emblem?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I like Fire Emblem for the characters actually.
Great
um,
characters.
yeah, great characters, and The interaction between the characters is a lot of fun. The stories are hit or
Yeah,
miss for a lot of the Fire Emblem games, but most of
Mm.
them have been pretty good from what I've played. I have not played any of the Last of Us games.
Oh, those
So
are good.
yeah,
Good storytelling. Horizon Zero Dawn.
I do
I'm
love
surprised
that
you didn't.
one.
Yes, and Sam, I'm surprised you didn't say that one.
Yeah.
For myself, I'll be honest, I haven't played much in the way of story-driven video games. But I have to say this, I love the first three Halo games in terms of just tight storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing necessarily groundbreaking about the story of Halo, but like just good concise storytelling combined with great gameplay and cinematic pieces
Yeah.
is just gorgeous for Halo. I love the unfolding story of Deltarune,
Yeah.
which is just, I mean, I might have to retract that statement in 10 years when the game is done. Since Toby Fox is working on it
Oh.
piecemeal, but the first two chapters so far really have a whole lot to tell, surprisingly. Like
Hmm.
there's surprisingly a lot going on in that game, and I'm looking forward to like doing a little bit more deep dives and analyses in the future of that because it's a lot of fun, and I enjoy how like kind of like with Fire Emblem, it's about the characters, and in Deltarune, it's about discovering the characters, and that's what's great about the story is how it helps you discover the characters. If you just slash and crash your way through Deltarune, it's a really weird 16-bit game. But if you take your time with it and get to know the characters, it's phenomenal.
Yeah. I think there's
So,
something to be said about video game stories because I feel like they're a little bit different in the way you approach them. In my
Mm-hmm.
experience, I feel like most video games actually benefit from more hands-off stories than they do like super involved stories. You know what I mean? And
mm,
so like if you ever look at like a lot of like say the stories that we've mentioned here, you can break down the story beats to a pretty simple, like what's the character's motivation? What's the game plan? How do they get there? Like it's not super complicated. That's not to say
Yeah.
that the stories aren't a major part of it, but that it doesn't take a lot to understand them and to be motivated by them. You know what I mean? It's like I feel
Very
like a lot
more straightforward.
yeah, I feel like a lot of games nowadays try too hard to have these big, sprawling stories. I don't know why we didn't mention this before. The Witcher 3.
Oh,
Phenomenal series.
hello.
Yeah, hello,
mhm.
staring
I
at us
knew that
right
there
in the
was
face.
I knew there was one more I was thinking of.
But
See,
it's like,
that one's tough because
yeah,
it's like you have the main story,
mm-hmm.
but anytime you do a contract or you do a
You get
quest,
like little
you
mini
get
stories.
you get so many other stories and you're like, I can't keep track of how many
Uh huh.
stories. That's not a bad thing. I'm just saying that is very narrative heavy.
Yes.
Mhm.
And actually, uh, they brought up in the chat exactly where I was going with this is that a lot of the times it's not just the story that does the storytelling. It's the set pieces, it's the gameplay, it's the way you experience the game will change
Right.
how the story is. One of my
Mhm.
favorite examples, I know I talk about this all the time, is Celeste. Very simple story,
Yes.
but the way you play the game heavily impacts the way you perceive the story because it very much puts you in the shoe of the character and you get frustrated right along with the character as she just dies over and over and over and over again trying to climb this mountain and it's
Hmm.
frustrating and you get
Yeah.
that sense with the character as you guys are growing together and overcoming these hardships together. And I think that
Mhm.
that's and the story is very simple. Like, I'm going to climb this mountain because I have anxiety and my brain is telling me that I need to go do something. That's it. That's the whole story, and everything can kind of build upon that rather than trying to convolute it. And I think that going back to The Witcher 3, it's like the main storyline is Geralt needs to find Ciri. And that's the driving force. Yeah, and that's the driving force for the whole game, more or less. Not to get into spoilers. And then the side quests are just ways to expand the realm, expand the lore, and maybe give you a little side distraction. But the core through line of the story is simple. It's understandable. It's not convoluted. And I think that that's something that a lot of video game storytellers kind of miss the mark on. They try and put too much in, and they end up just kind of making it muddled. Like, there's no clear, like, okay, what was the point of this story? I don't know, just to put a bunch of story stuff together. It's like, that doesn't make for a very satisfactory ending.
Yeah.
It feels like a Mod Podge.
Well, and to go off of that, this totally is not about dialogue anymore, but that's okay. To go off of like The Witcher 3,
which does have good dialogue, so let's loop that in there.
Has fantastic dialogue, and you get to choose what kind of dialogue, like how you're having Geralt respond. Anyway, to go off of like, there are a lot of like side stories and storytelling, yada yada. I still feel like even if it is very narrative heavy, it's still impactful because the choices that you make for not for every, but for a lot of quests that you're doing, your choices have consequences. And so everything is changed based off of the choices that you make, which also kind of overall changes it. That can change the course of the game as well.
Yeah.
So it's very intricate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and intricate and convoluted are not the same thing.
Right.
No, you definitely don't want your story to fall into the realms of convoluted.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll throw this out there as just kind of like, I think a good example of contrast between good and bad within actually the same franchise would be the Final Fantasy games. Some Final Fantasy games that are almost too simplistic, and then there's some that are like heavily convoluted with just all these different stories. Final Fantasy VII is still one of the most beloved, if not the most beloved, Final Fantasy game. I think because it hits that sweet spot of amazing big story, but it all makes sense because you're playing your way through every single major chapter of that story. You're discovering the characters along the way. So all of the characters are getting great character development as you play them throughout this larger story. You don't have to, and like the little side quests just help to like build up the lore of the world, but they're not throwing all of these other complicated stories and backstories at you that you then have to resolve. And so you get the great big story, which Final Fantasy VII really has a lot to offer. There's a lot to chew on. It's manageable because you're playing through it all, rather than snippet here, snippet there.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a pretty great place to end this live stream. Thank you so much. I'm gonna butcher this name. I'm sorry, Alvaro. I'm assuming that's pretty close. Thank you for your comments there at the end, as well as Dragon Uprising. Thank you, and Title, and everybody else who's here. Thank you so much for joining us, and we really appreciate it. And John, of course, John. Who else?
Always John.
Always John. Tevin.
The Spirit of Jed.
The Spirit of
Jed. And we also had Surides show up. Sursides. I'm butchering
Don't
that
ask
name.
me. I'm dyslexic. Don't ask me how to pronounce names.
But yeah, thank you to everyone who showed up and who participated in the chat. You guys are all awesome.
Yeah, great comments.
Absolutely. It was a really good one. And if you want to keep the conversation going, as always, join our Discord if you're not already there. And it's always a great time. And you can get help or just bum around in the chats because we
Just
like
vibe.
we like vibing, just vibing. Come talk to some fun people. So anyway, okay, well, it's getting kind of late and I'm getting kind of tired. So,
Well, you poor Bubba. You poor baby.
I know I'm getting old. I get tired at
Getting
like
those
10
sea legs.
o'clock.
Same. I've honestly, every night I look forward to laying in bed and reading before I go to sleep. That's the stage I'm at in my life.
What a time to be alive.
It's a good life, man.
It's a good
Alrighty,
life.
I'm ending this live stream. Bye.
Goodbye, Mom.